So you want to own a fast food franchise, something like Wendy's. Not just eat a Baconator. Own the place. The red pigtails on the sign, the frosty machine, the drive-thru, the whole operation. You have seen the numbers. The average Wendy's location pulls in roughly $2,100,000 in sales every year, and that is a fair stand-in for what a serious fast food franchise can generate almost anywhere in the country. That sounds like a license to print money. You imagine yourself as the local burger baron, the person who signs the checks, the one who decides when the doors open and close. Here is the first problem. Money is only the beginning of the problem. Before you ever hand over a single dollar, you have to prove you are even allowed to buy one. Wendy's requires a minimum net worth of $1 million, and at least $500,000 of that has to be liquid cash. Not your house, not your retirement account. Actual spendable money sitting in an account with your name on it. And that is only the published floor for a single restaurant. The real threshold for a new multi-unit operator is much higher. Several sources put the practical requirement at $5 million in net worth and $2 million in liquid capital. That is the number Wendy's actually expects from a serious buyer. That still does not buy you anything. It only buys you a seat at the table. You pay a $5,000 application fee just to have your paperwork considered, and that fee is non-refundable whether you get approved or not. Then a $500 background investigation fee. Then, if you are approved, a $50,000 initial franchise fee to actually license the brand. Wendy's receives thousands of franchise inquiries every year. Only a small fraction ever get approved. And if you are a first-time buyer with no quick-service restaurant experience, your application does not get rejected outright. It just quietly goes to the bottom of the pile. Wendy's is not looking for passive investors with a checkbook. They are looking for operators who have already run restaurants, who understand food cost percentages, labor schedules, and the chaos of a lunch rush. The company has said as much in its own filings, stating that its focus for new development is with existing franchisees or newly approved operators who already know the business. A first-time buyer is the exception, not the target customer. And the fantasy of hiring a manager and collecting a check from home does not survive contact with the actual agreement. Wendy's requires you, or a designated operator you personally train and register, to be actively involved in running the restaurant day to day. You cannot simply own the paper and disappear. So, before you ever see a price tag, you have to clear a screening process built to filter out everyone except experienced, well-capitalized operators. Having the money is step one. Being the kind of person Wendy's trusts to represent their brand is step two, and that step has nothing to do with your bank balance. Let us say you clear both. You have the net worth, the liquid cash, the operating background. Wendy's sends you a franchise disclosure document, a legal filing that runs into the hundreds of pages. Read it closely, and you will notice something strange for a brand this size. It lists 33 active litigation cases, a number well above the industry average for a system its size. That is not a footnote. That is a signal of a franchise relationship where the franchisor and its franchisees are in ongoing conflict, often enough that lawyers are a permanent line item. Now you are ready to sign. And this is where you learn that ownership and control are two completely different things. You own the building. You own the equipment, the inventory, the payroll, and the headache. Wendy's owns the brand, the recipe book, the approved supplier list, and the right to tell you what to do with all of it. You cannot change the menu. You cannot change the price of a Frosty without permission. You cannot decide to close on Sundays or open an hour later on a slow Tuesday. The agreement specifies your operating hours, and you follow them. You also cannot choose your own suppliers. Every ingredient, every cup, every napkin has to come from a Wendy's-approved vendor. If you find a cheaper supplier and want to switch, you submit a written request, Wendy's inspects the facility, and you pay for that inspection. Approval is rare. This is not a small detail. It means you have almost no ability to control your single largest recurring cost, the cost of the food itself. The franchisor can also require you to remodel your restaurant at your own expense, on their schedule, not yours. A full reimage can cost anywhere from $400,000 to $900,000 per location. You do not get a vote. You either fund it, or Wendy's can decline to renew your franchise term when it expires. And that term is not permanent. A Wendy's franchise agreement typically runs 20 years, with a renewal option for another 10. But renewal is not automatic. It depends on Wendy's determining that you are in good standing, and good standing includes hitting every remodel deadline on their calendar. Miss one, and the renewal option can simply disappear. Here is another detail most buyers never think to ask about. Wendy's does not grant you an exclusive territory. You can spend $3 million building a location, and Wendy's can still approve a second franchise a mile down the road selling the exact same menu. You have no legal recourse. You chose the site. They approved it. They can approve a competitor next to it too. You also do not own the customer relationship. Wendy's owns the digital ordering platform, the loyalty program, and the terms of the deal with every delivery app. You are the fulfillment center. The data, the app, and the customer's phone number all belong to corporate. So what do you actually own, in the legal sense that matters? You own the obligation to operate. You own the debt used to build the place. You own the lease. Wendy's owns the license, the brand, and the right to take all of it back if you fail to meet their standards. You are not buying a business in the way most people picture that word. You are buying a job with a very expensive entry fee and a boss who takes a percentage of your revenue every single month, whether the month was good or not. Now let us talk about what that revenue actually looks like once it reaches your bank account. Because the number on the sign outside is never the number in your pocket. Revenue is not profit. That is the first lesson of operating economics, and it is worth saying plainly. Your average Wendy's location pulls in about $2,100,000 a year in gross sales. That sounds like a real fortune. Watch what happens once you start subtracting. Food and paper costs eat roughly 30 to 33% of that revenue. Labor, including payroll taxes, takes another 30%. Rent or mortgage payments claim somewhere between 8 and 12% depending on your market. You are already well under $1 million before a single fee goes to Wendy's. Then the franchisor takes its share. A 4% royalty on gross sales, plus a 4% contribution to the National Advertising Fund, combine for 8% of every dollar that walks through your door, whether or not you liked that quarter's ad campaign. On $2,100,000 in revenue, that is $168,000 paid to corporate before you have paid yourself a dollar. Add the smaller costs that rarely make it into anyone's mental math. A technology fee of somewhere between $5,000 and $12,000 a year. A 3.5% fee on every order placed through the app. Insurance premiums that start at $2 million in liability coverage per occurrence. Utilities, maintenance, and supplies, each taking their own bite. When the dust settles, restaurant-level profit margins typically land between 12 and 20% of revenue. For most real-world franchisees, the realistic number sits closer to 10.5%. On the average location, that works out to roughly $220,000 a year in owner earnings. That is your salary for running a $2 million operation, 7 days a week, with your own capital on the line. Now compare that to what you put in. Building and opening a Wendy's typically requires somewhere between $1.5 million and $3 million in total investment. Generating $220,000 a year on that puts your return on investment somewhere around 7 to 15%, before you count a single hour of your own labor as a cost. And that number assumes a good year, with no remodel mandate, no lawsuit, and no local competitor cutting into your traffic. Here is the part that reframes everything you just heard. Wendy's corporate reports a gross margin above 34%. That is not burger margin. Burgers do not carry margins like that. That is fee margin, royalty margin, and real estate margin, sitting on top of a business where the franchisee's own margin sits closer to 6 to 9%. The difference between those two numbers is the entire hidden business model. The sign outside says burgers. The real business is something else. Think of it less as a restaurant chain and more as a royalty collection system with real estate and recurring fees layered on top, wearing a mascot's face. Start with the supply chain. 3 independent processors supply nearly all the fresh beef used across the entire system, and one single distributor services roughly 67% of every restaurant in the country. As a franchisee, you have no leverage to negotiate a better price on beef, chicken, or fry oil. You buy from the approved list, at the price the approved list sets, and if you want to try anything else, you pay for your own inspection and probably get told no. Then there is real estate. Wendy's owns or controls many of the sites its restaurants sit on, and leases that land back to franchisees. Your rent is not a neutral cost. It is a separate profit center for the franchisor, one that keeps generating income whether your sales are up or down that quarter. Then there is the remodel fee structure. Even the process of complying with a mandatory renovation carries its own toll. A project management fee, commonly around $20,000, goes straight to Wendy's just to oversee work you are already required to pay for. A technology fee, running $6,500 to $12,000 a year, keeps the point of sale and app infrastructure running, whether you wanted the upgrade or not. And there is even a captive insurance arrangement, Square Deal Insurance Company, owned by the franchise system itself, collecting premiums from the same operators it insures. Every input you touch, food, rent, technology, insurance, has a toll attached to it that flows back toward the franchisor. That is not an accident of scale. That is the design. This is not theory. It has happened in public, with real companies and real dollar amounts attached. In 2024, Flynn Group, the largest franchise operator in the world, tried to buy 83 Wendy's locations across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Flynn had the capital. That was never the issue. Wendy's initially refused the sale because Flynn also owned Arby's and Panera Bread locations, and viewed that overlap as a conflict of interest with its own brand. The deal only closed after months of negotiation and a change in posture from the franchisor. That is what the approval process looks like for a buyer with billions in annual revenue. Imagine what it looks like for you, with a single location and no track record. The franchisor holds the keys to every transfer and can delay, demand, or deny without ever explaining why. Go back further to 2011 and you find Wendy Partners, at the time Wendy's largest franchisee, operating 329 locations across 20 states. When Wendy's rolled out a new burger that required mandatory bun toasting equipment, Wendy Partners refused to install it. Wendy's sued them. The case eventually settled, but the message to every other franchisee was unmistakable. Even the biggest operator in the system cannot resist a corporate mandate without ending up in court. The franchise disclosure documents' 33 active litigation cases are not abstract legal trivia. They include disputes over supplier mandates, franchise transfers, and employment practices. One case involved a cashier who sued Wendy's corporate directly, as a joint employer, after being assaulted by a supervisor at a franchise location. A court allowed that case to proceed against the franchisor itself, not just the local franchisee. That is the uncomfortable truth about the corporate structure. The liability at your individual restaurant does not always stay contained to your individual restaurant, and it does not always stay out of Wendy's own courtroom either. The risk in this business is not visible from the parking lot. You are standing in a clean dining room, watching a busy drive-thru lane, and the numbers on paper look fine. But the real threat is buried in the fine print of the agreement you already signed. Wendy's can require you to remodel your restaurant at any time, and the cost of a full reimage runs $400,000 to $900,000 per location. This is not optional, and it is not a suggestion. You either fund it, or you lose the right to keep operating under the brand. Here is the math that actually breaks the deal for a lot of owners. You are earning roughly $220,000 a year on a single location. Now imagine you own 10 of them, which is exactly the scale Wendy's wants its serious operators to reach. A system-wide remodel mandate at that scale means $4 to $9 million in forced capital spending, with no negotiation and no opt-out. You fund it from cash flow or from new debt, or Wendy's can simply decline to renew your agreement when the term ends. And renewal was never guaranteed in the first place. The initial term runs 20 years. The renewal option runs 10 more, but only if Wendy's decides you are in good standing. And good standing includes hitting every deadline on their remodel calendar. Miss one, and the renewal disappears. At that point, you own a building and a kitchen full of equipment, but you no longer own the right to sell a single Wendy's burger out of it. Your asset becomes what is politely called a stranded investment, and less politely, a very expensive empty building. This exact scenario has already played out. In a documented case from 2023, a franchisee in Canada tried to sell their Wendy's locations. Instead of approving a buyer, the franchisor moved to terminate the agreement outright. The court upheld Wendy's right to do exactly that. The franchisee lost the entire value of the business they had spent years building, in a single ruling. This is the liability that sits underneath the floor of every location. You rarely see it until the day you try to leave, and by then, the cost was already written into the contract you signed on day one. Because buying in is easier than getting out cleanly. A Wendy's franchise is not a liquid asset. You cannot list it for sale and expect a quick check. The buyer pool is small by design. Wendy's requires any new multi-unit operator to show a minimum net worth of $5 million and $2 million in liquid capital. That single requirement eliminates the overwhelming majority of individual buyers before they ever make an offer. And even when a qualified buyer does appear, Wendy's has to approve them. The franchisor holds a right of first refusal on every sale, meaning they can match your buyer's offer and take the deal themselves, or block the transfer for almost any reason at all. They can also require the incoming buyer to sign a new agreement with worse terms than yours, which is often enough to kill a deal on its own. The price you eventually get is capped by the same fee structure that squeezed your profit for years. A typical multi-unit Wendy's franchise trades at somewhere around 4.5 to 6 times EBITDA, a common measure of a business's core cash earnings, before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization are subtracted. But remember, those core earnings were already compressed by the 8% royalty and advertising load every single year you operated. An independent burger restaurant with identical revenue and a wider margin would likely sell for a higher multiple, on a larger number, for the exact same amount of work. And the timing right now works against you. Wendy's same-store sales declined nearly 5% in the third quarter of 2025. The company is closing between 200 and 350 underperforming locations as part of an internal turnaround effort. Leadership has been unstable, with a chief executive departing after only 13 months, part of a pattern of 2 CEOs leaving within 2 years. None of that helps your exit multiple. A brand under pressure sells its franchises for less, to fewer buyers on worse terms. The buyer on the other side of that table is not a stranger walking in off the street. It is almost certainly a large, sophisticated consolidator, a company like Meritage Hospitality Group, which already owns more than 380 Wendy's locations, or a private equity-backed roll-up looking to buy at scale. Those buyers do not pay retail prices. They know the real margins, they know the remodel obligations coming due, and they price accordingly. So when the day comes to sell, you are not really selling a business. You are selling a license to operate under someone else's rules, with a mandatory remodel bill attached, a shrinking category around it, and a franchisor who still controls the door on the way out. The asset was never the whole business to begin with. So here is the full arc, laid out plainly. The entry cost. The control you surrender the moment you sign. The revenue waterfall that turns $2 million into $220,000. The hidden profit centers that sit above your restaurant, not inside it. The lawsuits that prove this is not theoretical. The catastrophic risk buried in a single remodel clause. And an exit that depends entirely on someone else's permission. The visible business is a Wendy's restaurant. Red hair on a sign, square burgers, a busy drive-thru lane. That is what the customer sees, and honestly, that is what you thought you were buying too. The real engine is the franchise agreement itself. It is the document that converts your capital, your labor, your insurance, and your liability into someone else's revenue stream. You take the operating risk. Wendy's takes the margin off the top, before you ever see a dollar of it. And underneath that is the fatal constraint. The agreement gives the franchisor the power to demand remodels on their timeline, to approve or reject any buyer you find, to set your operating hours, to dictate your suppliers, and to decline your renewal at the end of the term, for any reason that fits inside good standing. You do not own the business in any meaningful sense of that word. You own a license to operate under someone else's terms, for a fixed number of years, at their discretion. You are not a business owner in the way the Franchise Expo brochure implies. You are a capital allocator for someone else's brand. You deploy the money, you carry the debt, you manage the labor and absorb the inflation. And when you eventually want to leave, you need permission to do that too. That is what owning a fast food franchise like Wendy's really is. A high-cost, low-control lease on a brand you will never actually own, with the only exit through a door the franchisor keeps the keys to. Swap the name on the sign for any other major chain, and the same shape holds. The mascot changes. The math does not.